We're going to record. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, or good morning, whatever time you're watching this. My name's Scott Alexander. Welcome to the MII TED Talk Club. We've just been watching a fantastic video. If you haven't had a chance to see it and you're watching this on catch up, please do watch Johnny's Son. You are not alone in your loneliness, where he asks several questions such as, how many people in your life have you had your last conversation with? A bit existential, that one. Here we have a panel, as usual, that we're going to ask questions to. But if anybody has any questions, if you want to drop into the chat, anything, maybe if you've got something about loneliness or where you're from or how that video impacted you from Johnny's Son, I thought it was marvelous. So, well worth going back to. So what we're going to do, we've watched this video. We're now going to ask panelists what they thought of it and how it's relevant to mediation. And I'll maybe start with Jane Buzek. You're over in California. Let me tell people about you though, Jane, because I like to do that kind of thing if I can. Let's find out where the videos are. That would be good, or the bios. She is principal of the Collaborative Communication Group, an executive coaching, consulting, and mediation firm based in the Chicago area. For over 20 years, Jane has enjoyed engaging clients as a facilitator, coach, consultant, and mediator at every level and across multiple industries. Jane has mediated hundreds of cases ranging from gang crime to eviction to human charges. You must have come across a lot of loneliness there in that time, Jane. But give me one thing from this video that impacted you.
Hi, thanks, Scott. I suppose what I took when they were talking about loneliness, first of all, I loved his quote. He said, "We all end up on the internet because that's where the people are." No matter what we have in our real lives. So I thought that was interesting. But what I thought was that what we can create as mediators is an opportunity for our participants to feel safe. I think that in the midst of other people, we can often feel the most lonely. And for us as practitioners, we can create those opportunities for the participants to engage in and practice that safety with each other. And so when I give my spiel at the beginning of every case or every mediation that I do, it always includes, role and neutrality and confidentiality and so on. But I also tell them it's a space where we can honor both ourselves and the other person. So it's a place that I hope that they're both able to both share and listen to the other side. And this gives them kind of permission and guidance on being vulnerable and compassionate, and also creating that space where that can dissipate a bit of the loneliness in the presence of others. That was my take.
Before I bring in the others, could I maybe ask you to say a bit more about feeling lonely within the group, and particularly if you're chatting about family, because you've left the group, and presumably there's a misunderstanding there, or you've left the gang in your case. So you've left the place where you're supposed to have been part of it, and if you're still part of that group, but nobody's hearing you, maybe say more about that.
Yeah, I think, and we were talking a little bit before everybody joined, and hopefully, Andrea, you'll bring that quote up. It was a great
Bring it
quote.
up, Jane. Bring it up.
No, I will not do it justice. So I'll wait for you to bring it in. But I think in mediation, it can feel very lonely. People come in with, or participants will come in feeling unheard, not understood, not feeling safe, and that's very alienating. Johnny's son talked about, hopefully you'll meet another alien. I think we all feel like aliens in situations like that when we go in, especially in a scary situation like a mediation. And I lately am just doing mostly, not just, but doing organizational conflict, so that people don't end up in court. But people come in just with so many guards. Those barriers they have to protect themselves are also those things that isolate them, and make them feel lonely. So I don't know if I answered your question, Scott, but I think we can help them bring those barriers down.
There are many ways that you can come back to all those points. I'm sure we will. You mentioned Andrea, so we'll bring her in. Andrea
Thank
Neal.
you.
Hold on, I'll have to read out the bio. a hard job, this. Andrea O'Neill is president of the MII and founder of ACON Resolutions. She's an accredited MII mediator and holds a master's in mediation and conflict intervention. She has had specialist training in separating couples, child inclusive mediation. Andrea is a certified synergy conflict management coach. She's also the lead MII lead for collaboration with the Irish Red Cross. Jane dropped you in it there a wee bit, Andrea, and said you're going to have to come up with a quote, and I expect it word for word. Not something I've ever managed to do in my life. So on you go.
I suppose it's a quote by George Orwell, and some people might know it. And it's really around that the most terrible loneliness is not, it doesn't come from being alone or away from other people, but it actually comes from being misunderstood. And I think when parties come into mediation or people come into mediation, they very much are at a stage where they're misunderstood. And there's a loneliness in that. And I think really as mediators, most of us will have experienced at some stage that conflict is actually an opportunity for connection for them. And where things have got so bad, and maybe just those walls that Jane was talking about have become so strong that actually conflict is the only way that they can feel connected to that other person. And there is a loneliness in that because you're not being understood. It's not, I mean, you're up when we think of our iceberg of conflict, we're up there in positions, and it's the only place we can feel, that we think that's a connection. And as a mediator, we're working to get underneath those issues. And underneath those issues is where the connection is. And I think when he spoke about holding the vulnerabilities to the light and putting words to them, I think that's what we do as mediators in a lot of ways, that we create that space to look at those really, I suppose, sometimes painful issues or painful situations that people find themselves in. And we sometimes put the words to it. And that might be through reframing. That might be, moving from the toxic to the clean language, the past to the future, the really sense of hopelessness to hopefulness. And in that way, we're helping to hold those issues up to the light. We're reframing them in a way, and we allow the other person to connect to them. So in some way, we're creating that space for connection and that move away from loneliness. And I think that's what we do as mediators in the room. I mean, I just thought it was so interesting that he used the analogy of the onion and the different layers. And for most of us going through mediation training, the onion would have been used as as a graphic or a visual about getting underneath the layers and peeling off the layers of the onion. So I think it's very interesting that he brings that up. Another piece that came to mind when I was looking at this for the first time was, some of the work that I do with migrants. And they come into the mediation room, they might have the same language, you might be working with interpreters, they don't have any family around them, they maybe don't have any friends, they don't have a place that's anchored to call home. And so very much you have to be very careful as a mediator to really mind that loneliness in a very protective way, like just hold it so that they're able to go underneath to where the issues are. And we can't take it away from them. Unfortunately, we don't have the power to do that. But what we can hope for is that there's glimmers of connection that makes that loneliness a little easier for them to carry themselves.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Lots there. We will bring in our third panelist today, who's Michael Lang. He's a mediator with more than 40 years' experience in the areas of family, workplace, organisational, congregational and public policy disputes. He is the founding director of the Master of Arts programme in conflict resolution at Antioch University, amongst his other works. He is the author of The Guide to Reflective Practice in Conflict Mediation. Michael, we heard a lot there. We heard the George Orwell quote. Andre's mentioned techniques that we can use to deal with people. And I suppose even levels of loneliness or different types of loneliness where you've got people who's not even their own language and they're kind of dependent there. And one of the other quotes that came up from the video that it struck me anyway was the comfort of being vulnerable. I'm sure we'll come back to that as well. But what was one thing that maybe you took from Johnny Sun's video?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that that wasn't there, and that's the distinction between being alone and loneliness. And I think it's really important to recognize that um, just because we are alone in a moment or in a more existential way doesn't necessarily mean that we are lonely. There are some of us introverts who are quite comfortable being with ourselves, and we are alone, but we don't feel lonely. So that's one thing. The second is that I think that there are, um, we could talk about loneliness in two ways, situational and organic. Um, Situational is, for example, someone coming into my office and sitting down and they don't know anything about mediation. It's a completely foreign experience for them. They're there for a reason. They either are hopeful or fearful or a combination of all of those. And they are feeling quite lonely because they have no connection to what's going to take place, what they're there to do. They know that there's a purpose, there's a function, there's an outcome, there's a process, but they aren't connected yet to any of that. And so there is a loneliness that exists. And there may be, let's assume that they are, that it's a divorcing couple. There's then the organic loneliness that exists for them, an intimate, warm, dependent relationship is coming apart or has come apart. And there's the loss of that sense of community that that relationship had for them. And so now they are feeling lonely because those things that were familiar, that were comforting, supporting, encouraging, uplifting, protective, no longer exist. And for us to be able to recognize both kinds of loneliness in our work, we tend to think about the second. We recognize that people going through conflict have these stressors in their lives, these difficulties, these frustrations. We don't often think about it as stepping in, they are stepping into an unknown, not just the future unknown, but they're stepping into an unknown in that they don't know what I'm going to say when I open my mouth for the first time.
Yeah, and do you, Michael, just from your point of view, when you're dealing with folk, do you always meet the parties separately before you bring them together, or do you meet them one day? How do you even structure that, or knowing that you're going to have lonely people coming in, knowing that there's going to be this situational loneliness and the organic loneliness are going to be coming into you? What do you do as a mediator that I don't know ameliorates it?
So I'm old fashioned. I use the phone. I talk with every person who's coming to do work in mediation in advance, and we have a conversation. And the purpose of the conversation is, of course, to gather a little bit of information about the individual, about the circumstance. But more than that, it is to begin building some kind of a connection, some kind of a relationship with them, for them to begin to see me as a person who they feel less lonely when they step into the room, that they can begin to see me as having capabilities, confidence, um, that I wouldn't say trustworthy because it's much too early for that.
Mm.
Um, so that's what I do. The one thing I never do is ask them to tell their story in yeah, separately. I don't want to hear about the conflict itself separately from them. I like it to be done in the presence, and I think it's probably my training in therapy that I think about bringing people together, and I'm not anxious about that. It doesn't cause me to be concerned about what might happen when people in conflict sit down together. So yeah, I use my voice. I use my presence as a way of bringing people into the process and feeling, um, hopefully, a bit more confident about what they're doing, not necessarily about the outcome, but about what they're doing.
Okay, I'll maybe bring in Jane on that point there, Jane, because what, if I'm hearing Michael right, is commercial point of view, is customer care. Okay, these are your customers now. You know, you've got maybe got a client that's paying you, and maybe those individuals coming in aren't paying, and maybe some organization is type of stuff. But in order to do your job right, you've got to give them a good experience. You've got to make sure that they're able to tell their story, whether they've told you or not. You're doing prep work. Is there stuff that you do that might be different, that might reduce loneliness levels or build trust in the process, build towards trust in the mediator, as it were, for the
Yeah,
sessions?
what's interesting is I think at least my training might be different than some of the processes that I'm hearing about that in, like, say, in Ireland or different models. But I very much, sort of like Michael, I like to I do meet with each individual in the mediation ahead of time, either via Zoom or preferably via Zoom. But it's more so that they can get to know me and get to understand, get comfortable with me and my style, and my presence, and also tell them what the process will look like. Um, I typically will, I mean, that's kind of, I leave it at that. It's typically a 30-minute check in because um, I want them to tell their story in front of the other person. And I feel like we all do perfectly capable of um, helping them, helping turn toxic language into, as you said, Andrea, you said earlier, clean language, um, and help it so that they can better hear each other. But I think the point with loneliness is that's their first touch point, right? So they're sitting all by themselves in worry, often, from what I've been told, about what this process will be, and they don't know. They're afraid, and that's very alienating. And so, what I help them to do, hopefully, is give them some context and content that will help alleviate some of that fear, and let them know that this is the voluntary piece. I think is very important in connecting to being seen and understood and feeling empowered. So letting them know that this is their process, that it's completely voluntary. They don't have to come to an agreement. They don't have to. They, it's voluntary, and I think that even that voluntary. I'm just kind of thinking out loud, actually, but I think maybe that piece helps to alleviate that loneliness that can come from feeling not connected and not in the unknowing part of the process or the people. In this case, me, the mediator.
Oh, okay, thank you, Jane. I'll come to Andre now. I mean, you mentioned the George Orwell quote there about the depth of loneliness effectively being when you're misunderstood. And Michael and Jane have said this is the techniques they use to bring people in. And in my own head, it's really difficult to be lonely if you're engaged, right? Because you're not thinking about loneliness, you're thinking about what you're engaged with. What is it you do and how do you do? And maybe to the audience, do you use different approaches? What do you use when you've got people coming in just to the audience? You drop it into the chat. And if you want, you can come on, just stick your hand up. Andre, anything you're doing?
Yeah, I think first of all, we don't always know firsthand that there is loneliness. We can make an assumption that there is a sense of, fear and anxiousness and everything else, but we don't necessarily know until we've kind of done a deeper dive. We might have a sense of it, but we've no certainty in it. So I think it's, really, I suppose the best thing to do when we go into the mediation room is very simple. It's to meet people where they're at. And really, if that's in a place of loneliness, well, then we meet them there. If it's in a place of, dysregulation in relation to emotions, then we meet them there. So I think loneliness, like every other emotion, is another emotion. So we meet them where they're at. And we use our skills that, I mean, there's plenty of them, across this Zoom call this evening, like, or today, this afternoon. But there's, the sense of empathy that, given the space to listen, to be heard, to know that in some way that they're understood. And even if that initial understanding comes from the mediator, but I think that's not a tool that's just used for loneliness. I think it's a tool for wherever we meet the parties at or the people at that are in front of us. Um, so I think that's key. And I think as a mediator, then we adjust to where they are and we bring whatever skills or experience we have into the room and really help to hold that space for them so that they can be vulnerable, that they can see, in this the YouTube, in the short film that we watched, there's John talks about that space of glimmer of hope, and I think in mediation, when two people start seeing the human in each other and can see where they're the same, and that's where we do our mutualization and everything else. That's where we see the glimmer of connection and the glimmer of hope. And I think that's really important about this, about the short film that we just watched. It's not just about loneliness. It's also about that glimmer of hope and that space for connection. And I think as mediators, just by being present, meeting people where they're at, and using the skills that we have, we create an environment that can happen.
Okay, thank you. So, Michael, meeting people where they're at, using those skills, you're comfortable putting two people together when you don't know the story. You're going to let it unfold in front of
Mhm.
you. That says to me you're very confident in yourself and in your ability to manage whatever comes out of it. But when we were chatting before we came on live, we were chatting about the loneliness, perhaps, or the aloneness, maybe that's a different word, of the mediator when you're in that process. So how do you cope? Is it just experience? Is it your reflective practice issues and background? How do you get around that loneliness of the long distance mediator?
It's interesting because thanks for the question, Scott. Um, Johnny's son talked about uh, the the notion that people are in their own separate universes, their own separate worlds, and and that there's a richness and a comfort and a joy that comes when they find one or more or 10 or 20 people with whom they can find an opportunity to share something about themselves and discover commonalities. And I think that's been a challenge for us in our field. One of the great things that the MII does are the sharing and learning groups, which are exactly opportunities for people to come together and say, I just had this most wonderful experience and I need to tell somebody about it. Or I can't believe I'll tell you what, I had a divorce mediation couple come in, and after about 20 minutes, she had an infant with her. And after about 20 minutes, she turned her chair around, and began breastfeeding. Who else am I going to tell that story to? Who would have an understanding? I could tell it to a friend. They wouldn't get it. They wouldn't get how awkward, confusing, and at the same time wonderful that this mom felt that this is the connection between the mom and the child, and it's what the child needed, and it's what the mom yearned to do. And why in the hell not? So, but who else am I going to tell that to? Who would, like this group, smile, laugh, and say, wow, I don't know what I would have done if that had happened to me. And so I do think that there is a huge value in all kinds of community. And the trick is finding a hook, the one thing that pulls us together. And what we hope is that the one thing is something positive, not anger, bitterness, resentment, those sorts of things, um, but rather something that is easy, mundane, comforting, to be able to get together. And I think it's really critical for us. What I've learned over a long period, a long career, is that I am better when I have the opportunity to connect with my colleagues. It doesn't matter whether we're sitting over a cup of tea and just chatting, or we're talking in more serious ways about the work that we do. We share something. All of us on this Zoom meeting, we share something. That's a starting place. It may not go anywhere beyond that. And if it doesn't, that's enough. It's something that unites us and makes a connection. I think it's really important. I'll
Okay.
stop.
Thank you very much, Michael. So things that unite us are really important. I know that in my um, practice, I normally, when we're dealing with somebody that's in mediation, I'll say to the parties, look, you're the only two people that can talk about what happened here, right? It's private. So, you're the only two that are experienced in this process. So hopefully they've made an agreement. But, if there's issues that come on, they can chat about it, and they're the only ones that go through it. So I suppose I'm looking at what is it that connects people. When they come in, they're disconnected, but what's connected to them is their past. Hopefully, going forward, what's connected them is the way that they want to move forward. And Michael's chatting there about having connections like this, where mediators get together, watch an unrelated video, and see, well, okay, can we draw any lessons from it at all? And then there's the reflective practice learning groups and whatever as well. And Michael's fantastic course that I just joined there. There you go, the wee plug for you, Michael. What about these connecting pieces for you as a mediator? What's important for you to maybe not stave off loneliness, but to feel part of a group or feel that you're growing or to test your theories and the way that you do things, Jane?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I feel that so the idea of how we can stave off loneliness as mediators, it's sort of a big thing. It's like and it depends on it. Like when I was for several years, was at the Illinois Department of Human Rights, and we did cases that were cross-listed between state and federal, so with the EEOC and the IDHR. And there were two of us, only two of us in-house. We were the first two in-house folks, mediators at IDHR. And we had a community there. We did have a community there because there were ourselves, there were the attorneys, chief legal counsel to whom we reported, the people helping in the office and everything. And we were able, since it was all a safe space, we were able to dispel some of that loneliness that you get from being a sole practitioner by doing what Michael's referring to. And also I'm part of his reflective practice is absolutely wonderful. Plug for Michael Lang. But I think it's harder now being a sole practitioner. I don't know all the people on the call today, if you're sole practitioners or you're within, a team of mediators, but it's really hard when you're on your own. And you need things like this. I find this very, this particular group fulfills part of that, especially when folks bring up questions or engage in issues that they're having or questions that they have or comments, because it does make you feel less lonely. And I think that's the most important piece of being a sole practitioner. I mean, even if it's just you're a consultant and not a mediator, but finding those connections with other people and being, someone talked about vulnerability. And how important that is to have a safe space for mutual vulnerability. So I think that for me, it's engaging in things like this or a reflective practice group, or even just having coffee or dinner with a practitioner here in Chicago once a month can really be helpful in dispelling some of that.
Yeah, we all need some kind of touchstone or connection in some way, Andre. And you're our president. You're our great leader at the Mediators Institute of Ireland. What about those connections and the importance of some kind of community, or how do you do it as a, because you seem to be connected to everybody in the world. So how important are those connections to you, and how do you keep it going?
I suppose I noticed Neve Fitzpatrick is on this call, so she'll laugh at this because Neve knows me from old. So I would always say one of my core values is connection. And that, that kind of creating not even relationships with people rather than just being connected to people on a professional level. That sense of friendship. I mean, I can see across this screen here so many people over the years who've either been involved in training me, supporting me, or doing anything. And I would say, they're all friends. Like they're not just professional colleagues. And I think that's what's the beauty of mediation is. And maybe I mean I've talked to people in different organizations across the globe, and that seems to come with the territory that we're in, that we very much build this community or family system. And I think that's why I feel so passionate even about the MII and what we create for mediators here in Ireland. And I mean, that's not something, I mean, I stand on the shoulders of so many people who've gone before me. I always say, I'm just holding the position for the next person. But this started over 30 years ago, where mediators were, starting to come together, and they went, yes, they needed to promote mediation, but they also recognized the need for community for the mediators that were there. And therefore, mediation to develop and grow and to share learning, create certification, there had to be some sense of organization or structure there. So, that was recognized over 30 years ago here in Ireland and by others. And each of us that come after will develop and grow that family. We're like the continuing generations, and there'll be generations that will come after. And what we're doing is we're carrying the values through, we're carrying the sense of connection through. And that gives us a sense of belonging. And you're no longer as lonely. So if something goes wrong, you're in a mediation. And because we're dealing with people in conflict, very few of us will get through our professional life or experience without having some backlash at some stage, because people are in conflict. So very often, the mediator might come back on the mediator in some way. And for them to be able to be part of a sharing learning group, be part of an organization that they can connect in with, more experienced mediators, or people with, or just somebody who will listen and really create a space for them to be heard and understood. It's so important. And that makes us better mediators. That makes us stronger in our role when we go into the room, because we don't feel alone. I remember, Michael, I don't know whether it was on one of our reflective practice groups or whether it was somewhere else. Somebody said they ran into the bathroom and phoned a friend, so, and that's what it is. It's having that security and that support, that you're never alone. There's always somebody. I'm looking to the left of my screen here. I can see Margaret, and I can see Niamh somewhere else. And there's loads of other people on this call. I can see Shun there as well. I know if I rang any one of them, if they didn't get back to me straight away, they'd ring later on and say, is everything all right? Do you need help? And the same way, if any of them contacted me, I'd return the call and say, is there anything I can do? So that's the beauty of connection. So connection is not only a gift to the people that are in front of us, it's a gift to ourselves. It makes it easier. It makes our job easier, and look, it makes our a lovely space to be in.
It does. It does. I noticed, Michael, that she didn't mention me when she was speaking there, but
Well, Scott, you're on my
I
right hand
picked up
side
on
all
that
the
as well,
time.
Scott.
well, not so she wouldn't phone me. But here, just it does remind me, because I've written a wee thing down there. Johnny's son uses humour, right, to get across his message, such like Michael, and you mentioned the woman who ended up breastfeeding her child and so on. What about the use of humour in mediation? Because you're dealing with some tricky stuff. It must be a fault, psychological fault with me. I make jokes about everything, like everything. It's really difficult for me not to make jokes and have fun. But what about in mediation? What are the benefits and the drawbacks of humor in mediation?
Well, two factors. One is timing, and the other is it your personality? Does it come across as authentic? Um, I have a friend who uses humor all the time, and I'll get to a quick story. He was doing a mediation with uh, no, I'm not going to tell the story. Sorry. It's got salty language. I'll leave it for another time. But the point is that he used humor at the outset that brought people together. And it was wonderful. And then he, at the end, it had to be about, it was about a bad check, and that the parties were mediating about that. And at the end, thinking that everybody was in good spirits and that he had done really well, and they were ready to pay, he said, "I hope you're not going to give me a check." And that's why humor, you have to be really, really careful because you could go just a little bit too far. Um, so it's not my, I love jokes. I love to tell them. I don't in mediation. It's just not my nature. It would feel unnatural to me. Whereas if we were sitting having a cup of tea, we could go and let me tell you this one, let me tell you that one, and I would be delighted to be able to share the jokes that touch me and to hear those from others. But I think what it leads me to, Scott, is authenticity. Whatever it is that we have as a human being, we can bring into the room. We can't just force it to happen, though. We have to be, and that's part of what happens with novice mediators, is learning to find their voice, learning to feel comfortable using themselves together with the knowledge and the skills that they've learned, and how to bring themselves into the room. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose, Jane, if when you started out and you were feeling particularly lonely, and if you make a mistake or if something doesn't go wrong, it's a desperately lonely place for a mediator to be, where you go, what the hell have I done? Unless you've got someone that you can bounce it off. And maybe you do look back and tell a joke about it, but you're not going to tell it at the time. Are there any, I don't want you to tell tales, obviously, but are there issues that you've come across yourself where you've gone, oh, I'm, I'm kind of lost, or have you seen it in the parties when you've been dealing with people?
It's hard to, I guess the way I'll answer this is I'm thinking about when I first started out at IDHR. Um, I was very new, not to mediation, but to dealing with really advocative attorneys, right? So each side had representation, and they were annoyed with me. They just wanted to, and as I learned, they would be. But I didn't yet have the gravitas or the experience to be able to like manage and say, to honor that and say, well, stick with me in this process and so on, and let's let the primary parties speak. But they were mad at me, and I didn't know at the time. I had to acknowledge their emotions too, right? In my mind, the parties were the primary parties in my training and everything. I mean, I was pretty green at this at the time, but they were getting annoyed with me with the process and things that later on they would get annoyed with the mediator. They're like, bada bing, bada boom. Can we just, here's the contract, here's our demand, here's our position, and so on. But so it escalated, and I left that mediation feeling, I think they settled, but it didn't feel good. You know how sometimes things will settle, but it's like, not in the best way. But I was able to then go back to Center for Conflict Resolution here in Chicago and talk with a case manager and talk it out. And that's what enabled me to do that. And that process, they're very supportive. They ask you, it's very reflective. They ask you, well, what do you think you could have done differently? Or where do you think that, So for me, that's what again, it's that sense of community that enabled me to get through something. But it is very lonely feeling when you feel you've really screwed up, and the impact on, then the worry of like, oh my goodness, did I cause harm? Did I whatever? That's very alienating, and it can be very grounding, and to talk with other people in order to reconnect. And again, somebody was talking about, even in a mediation, thinking forward instead of past, right? Having that glimmer of hope, that things can get better, and that sense of empowerment that I can do something better, that can dissipate for me that loneliness.
Okay, Andrea, I'll bring you in. I mean, picking up on Jane's point about this, feeling that you've messed up and feeling lonely in that position. If you're dealing with senior people, company directors or CEOs or whatever. It's a lonely position, right? They make decisions, and eventually they might bring people in. They might be quite inclusive, but they make decisions to, I don't know, put stuff on Truth Social, whatever. You make those decisions, right? But they then will sometimes cover it up. They'll protect themselves. You were chatting about walls earlier, coming
Mm,
in. They protect themselves by hiding the real reason. And at the
mm.
end of it, you might still find it's a scared little onion in the middle once you get down the layers and such like. But what do you do when you've got somebody, you're looking at them and you're going, they're putting on this bravado, they're putting on the strength, they're maybe doing this, but behind it, you might go, you know what? They're hiding something. How do you get through? If it may be loneliness, it may be other kind of something, feeling of rejection or whatever. But how do you get under that?
I suppose, but when I'm listening to you describe that, I'm thinking of, that sense of a fear of judgment, that person maybe is afraid that they're going to be judged in some way, or there might be a certain amount of shame in relation to the decisions they made or the actions they took or how they handled it. There might be a sense of protection. I need to protect myself in this role, and again, that's about building up trust with the mediator and to really know that they aren't going to judge them or they're not going to, I suppose make them feel shamed in the room or make them feel that sense of shame. And I think that's about the connection. I'm sorry now to go back to connection, but that's about the connection the mediator builds with that individual. And that can be sometimes a slow burner. And sometimes, if we go into a mediation and maybe we're in the first joint session, or they mightn't be ready to go there, Scott. So again, to go back to Michael's timing is really important. And then if we connect that back to the video that we watched about holding the vulnerabilities into the light, I mean, they have to be ready for that. And if that's a fear of judgment, well, then what they need, if they fear judgment, they need to trust that they're in an environment that they're not going to be judged. Or they might need to trust that whatever they did is not going to be passed on or disclosed to somebody else. I mean, it might be a situation that you have to disclose that and you would have gone through your confidentiality agreement and the caveats around confidentiality. But just say, for example, it's not something that has to be disclosed and it's a sense of judgment. Well, it's really about allowing them the space to build trust and getting the timing right to actually go underneath the surface around that, maybe that wall that has been built up. And sometimes it's just about, allowing, a crack in the wall or taking out one brick and allowing them to maybe expose something small. And then you're building up that sense of, okay, I did that and that was okay. And then I feel safe enough with the mediator. I can tell them this piece. And actually, I feel that I can be completely vulnerable here and allow them share that space. It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast with Brené Brown and Adam Grant only there last week as I was in the car, and they were talking about vulnerabilities, and the importance of there being boundaries around that vulnerability. And for each of us to be vulnerable, there, and to be safe, we sometimes need to put boundaries in place. And I'm presuming that when people come into the room with us, they will expose a certain amount of vulnerability with boundaries because they're there and they feel they need to protect themselves. So as they feel safer in the room or as they feel their trust builds up with us as a mediator, I'm presuming those boundaries will become more flexible. And if they don't, we have to honour them. We can't force ourselves underneath either. We can't force ourselves past that. I think we have to do it in a very gentle way. And that would be the way I would approach it.
Okay. Michael, we're coming near the end here. We've heard quite a lot of techniques. We've been into vulnerability, to loneliness, use of humor, all kinds of stuff, throwing it together. Is there anything here on this theme of loneliness that you'd like to reflect back on?
Uh, as I was listening I, to my own comments as well as to those from Janie and Andrea, what I realized is that we need to be careful that we don't feel responsible for someone else. Um, that I can't make somebody feel less lonely. I can't cause something to occur. And that's really important to remember. At the same time, what I can do is through my own behavior and through the way in which I help to manage the process, if I can help someone feel that they are um, able to be themselves, if they are treated respectfully, if their dignity is honored, it allowed that sort of psychological sense of connection that it allows people to participate to the fullest extent of their capacities. And if we can do that, then it helps them move out of that place of isolation or loneliness and be authentically and fully engaged as they see it, as they make that decision.
Okay, thank you. And Jane, any final thoughts from you?
No, I feel like I've said everything, everything that I can, other than I really appreciate listening to kind of Andrea and Michael's and your Scott's perspectives and how it broadened like loneliness and the connection to connection and ways and then responsibility that Michael was speaking about. It's sort of as a mediator, we honor what emotions come out and allow them to express them and feel them and help empower them or create that environment where they feel empowered that they can address those emotions within that safe space. But I appreciate, and also, I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments. I don't know if we have any, I guess we don't have time for that at the moment, but thank you all for the great comments.
Okay. Oh, we're going to come to Emily in a wee second because, hey, we're flexible here. Any final comments before we hear from Emily?
No, I just think, again, this is about the enriching experience of coming together and having conversations and sharing ideas. So I think in that note, let Emily connect with the group and ask her question.
I have just one quick thing,
Yeah.
if you don't mind, Scott. Um, what you demonstrate, Scott, is in fact an example of how to help people come together. Both the thoughtfulness of your questions, but also the way you ask them and the way you build connections among the panelists in particular. And I think it seems invisible, which is good, but it's noteworthy and valuable.
Now you've made me feel alone. Emily, Emily, in you come. You have to unmute again.
A quick one, Scott. Just thank you so much to the panelists for such an enlightening conversation there as well. But I just wanted to briefly say, because listening to Jane talk about the loneliness and Andre, who always is there for every single one of us, and Margaret included, and Neve, is they're always there for us. I've just finished research from the view of from the perspectives of mediators who are involved in cross-border child abduction. This research was meant to be all about, how they work within their day, what they need, etc., etc. But after 4 years, what it became about was connection, what they needed, how they worked with each other, how when COVID hit, there was no chats over the water fountain in the office. So they lost all that. When they finished a Zoom call, they just clicked and it was over. And you're sitting alone in your room. And how did they deal with that? What was their way of looking at self-care? Self-care became really, really important. And some people moved to co-mediation because they felt, well, I can pick up the phone straight away and I can discuss this. And they know exactly what I'm going through. From their perspective, we'll both see something. So it was really interesting to hear everybody talking about what my findings were. That it always comes back to we're real people. We need the connection. Jane needs that person to reach out. You're an excellent, I hate even opening my mouth at these things because of all these experts in the room. But when I listened to Jane, I could hear you, I could hear it there that there's times when you just go, as Michael says, the sharing and learning groups are the key. That came out fully in my findings. Sharing and learning groups should be subsidized, should be organized for everybody, and should be a part, which they are, to be fair, for most of us. But there's still that element of sitting in the background. They're the things that keep us connected. They're the things that help us to say, well, actually, I just had this case and we're back to a safe space.
Thank you very much, Emily, for that contribution.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, that was brilliant. No, I really enjoyed today. Hopefully you did, folks. And thank you to the panel, Michael Lang, Jane Buzek, and Andrea O'Neill, and to all of you, and to Emily Dunn there for contribution. Next time, the 14th of May, it's a Thursday. At 1 o'clock Irish time. What is this? This is British summertime, isn't it? The skill of self-confidence. Isn't that going to be good? Yeah, total opposite. By Dr. Ivan Joseph. We're going to be looking at that video next time. So hopefully you can join us on the 14th of May. Put it in your diary. It'll be the same link. But tell all your friends. Tell all these people that are lonely out there, all these poor mediators that don't have anyone. They can come here and they can join in and they can do all those lovely things, all these beautiful comments that we're getting there. So thank you very much, everybody, for today. And we'll see you next month. And if you don't want to just click off the Zoom call, then don't. You can hang about and chat. That's okay. But we're going to stop recording now.